Fishing trips anywhere, anytime. FishingBooker.com. Want to plan your next fishing trip without the hassle? FishingBooker.com is the best way to find and book a fishing charter anywhere in the world. Whether you're chasing trophy fish or just looking for a family day on the water, Fishing Booker makes it simple, fast, and secure. With thousands of experienced guides, verified reviews, and 24/7 customer support, Fishing Booker takes the guesswork out of planning. Visit FishingBooker.com and book your trip today. Fishing Booker. Fishing trips made easy.
Hey, what's up, happy people? This is Robert Arrington from Deer Meat for Dinner. If you're into bow fishing like I am, you need to check out Cajun Bow Fishing. I've been using their gear for years, from the Sucker Punch Pro to the Winch Pro Reel. It's tough, it's reliable, and it works. Whether you're just getting started or you're ready to take the step to the next level, head over to CajunBowfishing.com and check out everything Cajun Bow Fishing has to offer. I trust their gear because it works. So if you're hitting the water soon, make sure you're rigged up with Cajun Bow Fishing. You will not regret it.
In today's episode of the Wild Fishing Game Podcast, we're diving into the idea that our outdoor pursuits, hunting, fishing, foraging, and even wild food cooking might actually be powerful tools for improving our health. We explore a fascinating field of science that looks at how movement, time in nature, creativity, service, and community contribute to overall well-being, and how these values show up naturally in the wild food lifestyle. This conversation connects the dots between what we do outside and how it makes us feel. Grab a seat, grab a drink, listen up.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
All right, welcome everyone back. We'll just go through a brief bit of news and then we'll get into it. We have a special guest today I'm excited to introduce you to, and as you heard from the brief intro, it's going to be a really cool topic. A little bit outside but not far outside. I think there's a Venn diagram somewhere where they cross. So we'll get into all that here very soon. I will say that next up, our next episode, we'll be discussing wild fermentation with fermentation revivalist Sandor Katz. Really excited about that. He's really excited about that. We're all really excited. Fermentation's really cool. We've been spending this spring getting a lot more into foraging, into fermentation, into just overall preservation of your wild food. Unlike going to a grocery store and buying it, we go through these seasonal changes, and sometimes you want to prolong what you have through a very natural means, and fermentation is that. So that preservation technique there not only is good for you, but it will help preserve your food as you harvest it. So you're not going to want to miss that episode. If you've got anything that you'd like to see discussed, shoot us a message on Instagram. It's at Harvesting Nature for all those that don't follow us, and let us know. We'll post a question a couple days before, so you'll have the opportunity to drop your questions there, but we always like seeing messages. News for me, I think in a couple weeks we're heading up to Montana. Adam may be heading down to Montana, but we might meet in the middle. We're going to be cooking the fundraising dinner for the backcountry hunters and anglers. We'll be doing a cool recipe out of the sausage book. If you have that book, you've probably seen it. It's the Chinese-inspired toad in the hole. We're going to do it in these like little anchovy tins and then serve a side of like pickled Chinese-style kimchi, which is different than Korean style. It's kind of cool. You see sometimes on the table at Chinese restaurants is like an appetizer or just like an amuse-bouche type deal. Really cool. Going to be a fun time in there. And then I guess other than that, Adam, what do you got going on?
Just been out doing a ton of foraging lately, cleaning up all the spring greens I can find and, dandelion petals. And so I've been out in the woods and a lot of urban foraging too, which is great for this time of year. There's tons of stuff out there. And then I've been in the kitchen kind of processing it all and fermenting some of it. And it's always a really exciting time of year. So I've been really focusing less on protein this time of year and way more on the green stuff that's popping up.
Nice. Yeah, I've been a little hesitant to get into too many fun adventures, given the fact that I'm moving in like a month and a half. So I'm paused on a lot of my long term projects. I'm trying to clean out the freezer. It's funny because I was just cooking the other night, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna bake something. I'm like, all right, I need to use all of this, all of this, all of this, because we got to like clear the pantry and the fridge before it's time to get on the plane and fly away. So let's see. Outside of that, I think one big thing, we're taking on initiative this summer to with our Eat More Invasive Species merchandise. So last week we launched the snakefish or snakehead T-shirt, which is the fish here in the Chesapeake that's pretty invasive, that does a lot of damage. Today we just launched a nutria, so that's down in Louisiana, invasive species that wrecks a lot of havoc down in the wetlands and the bayou there. All of our shirts and stickers and products from this line for the entire summer. We'll be donating a portion of the proceeds to select conservation organizations that have some tie-in to that invasive species. We're trying to do some good in the world other than just sell t-shirts and stickers. We want to take some of that funds and put it back into conservation. So with that, go check out those things and keep an eye out as they come out every week. And hopefully I see you at Rendezvous rocking a cool new Nutria t-shirt. But all right, well, I'll go ahead and introduce our guest without further delay, because you're probably tired of hearing me talking, and that's okay. Today's guest is a solutions-focused journalist and award-winning author of The Connection Cure, the first book chronicling the science, stories, and spread of social prescribing. She reports on evidence-backed ideas and advises health organizations like Walk with a Doc and Social Prescribing USA. She has spoken at TEDx, taught in medical schools and practices, delivered keynote speeches, advised policymakers, and much more. Jules Hotz, welcome to the Wild Fishing Game podcast.
Thank you so much, Justin and Adam. I have to say, I am excited for your fermentation episode. I recently got my hands on like an unbelievable amount of purple cabbage. Ooh. And what does one do with that much purple cabbage after, you've had like purple cabbage salads for a week? So you got to ferment it. So yeah. I'll be tuning in.
Yeah. Ooh, that's great. You could do a quick pickle. Quick pickles are always good.
Yeah, for sure. Love the quick pickle. But you know what? I'm at this place. My partner's out of town that I'm ready to just take over the counters and ferment some shit.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Fermentation station going.
Oh, that's great. Could you, I gave a brief introduction, and it doesn't dive deep into it, but could you kind of go through sort of your background, how you got to where you are today for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, your mission's very close to my heart. I grew up on a lake. My parents, they said, you can't have cable television, but you can have this amazing lake and forest. And my brother and I grew up fishing and swimming and boating and just digging up things in the river. But like most things, you don't really come full circle and see the significance of that in your life until you're forced to. And so for me, when I became a journalist, I reported on lots of different health and mental health topics. And I also studied loneliness as, a sociologist at the University of Cambridge, was really interested in that. But where all these things came together was really during the throes of the worst of the lockdown, when it became clear that everyone being inside all the time, cut off from what mattered to them, cut off from their hobbies, cut off from other people, cut off from their work, started to take a toll on our health. And not just in the obvious ways. It wasn't just loneliness that people were feeling. People were reporting increased anxiety, depression, attention issues, addiction. And so that's what led me onto this journey of looking at how the UK had responded to the ways that, our environments could be a source of harm for us through this thing called social prescribing. And that is literally this idea where your doctor or your therapist or your nurse or some health professional you see will write you a prescription for some kind of community-based activity. So I went all around the world and I saw things from, art classes on prescription, farms on prescription, to fishing on prescription. I'm sure you'll love that. Wild sea swimming. And it turns out there are a lot of reasons why this isn't just good for our physical health, to be moving our bodies and away from the things that stress us out, but it's also incredible for our mental health. And my book, The Connection Cure, is all about why that is and real stories of people who've been helped through this.
That's awesome. So when we're talking about social prescribing, could you tell us what the tenets of it are?
Yeah. So, the way that I structured my book is around, what are the sort of pillars of social prescribing? So in my book, I chose to structure it around movement, nature, art, service, and belonging. And there's a couple reasons for this. Number one, when I went around the world and looked at what kinds of social prescriptions were the most common, these 5 ingredients kept cropping up. But then when I did a little bit of research on why is it that nature is so good for our health? Why is it that art is so good for our health? It actually comes back to a principle that I think your listeners would really understand and identify with. The way that our hunter-gatherer lifestyles were incredibly good for us. Because think about what we were doing. To get food, we were moving our bodies. It was not optional, right? We had to run and crouch and jump and compete with predators. So it makes sense that our bodies respond well to movement. Exercise is associated with not only all kinds of cardiovascular benefits, but has all these mood benefits too. We increase our serotonin, endorphin production. The same is true, again, unsurprising for your listeners, I'm sure, with nature. It turns out to be good at harvesting food, hunting food, gathering food, you have to be really good at paying attention to nature. Everything from the weather to where the ripples are on water to, what kind of leaves on the trees provide the best shade. And it turns out that even today, nature is one of the best things for sort of restoring our attention, reducing our stress levels, has all these incredible physical and mental health benefits. Art, service, and belonging are a little bit harder to initially understand. You might think, really? Did the hunter-gatherers need art to survive? But it turns out they did, to be able to tell stories and make sense of the world. This was key to being able to survive in a group. The same is true with service, being able to cooperate with other people, develop systems of mutual aid. And finally, of course, we know belonging was so important because we know, for example, now that the opposite, when you exclude somebody, their bodies respond in this visceral way. It's actually our bodies register exclusion the same way that they register physical pain. Oh, wow. And from a hunter-gatherer perspective, that makes a lot of sense. If you were excluded, your odds of survival weren't very good. So our bodies adapted to be able to respond to that exclusion and loneliness. So I think that's just it. And finally, the third reason why movement, nature, art, service, and belonging is these things are fun. These things tend to be what we turn to when we need a sort of mood boost or relief from our stress. Our hobbies tend to revolve around these 5 things. So that's why I focused on those 5.
That's super interesting. Could you give us a couple real life examples that you encountered when you were traveling around the world and researching this stuff?
Totally. I think you'll love this one because listeners in your community know this all too well. So I went to England to meet this gentleman named Dave. And Dave is this guy in his 30s. He tells me he used to be addicted to alcohol. He struggles with ADHD and, social anxiety a little bit. And so it was during the pandemic that he sort of hit rock bottom, had to move back home with his mother. But all of a sudden, by being sort of forced to shut in, he started looking out his window, which was overlooking a lake, and became really, really curious about angling. And so he starts watching all these YouTube videos, becomes really interested, buys all the gear, and suddenly just starts taking himself out to the river where he meets a lot of other people, all ages, older people, younger people. Suddenly he realizes that this had become his new stimulant, right? He couldn't wait to get up out of bed in the morning to go out there to the river. And he also realized that it did something to his body. It made him sit still, and it forced him to be able to focus on the river. Long story short, you can read the book for the full story. Dave ends up starting a club called Tackling Minds, where other people like him who are going through some kind of mental health recovery journey can come and join this free fishing group. He starts out, he's able to get a little bit of equipment through different charities. It's so successful that eventually the National Health Service, England's version of, healthcare, hears about this and says, we want to be able to prescribe this to patients, particularly patients with anxiety and ADHD who are struggling with addiction, struggling with PTSD. And that's how I end up meeting this individual named Nick, who, if you were to tell Nick about social prescribing, this idea of your doctor prescribing you some kind of community-based activity, he'd probably roll his eyes, because for a lot of people, that sort of socialization does not sound like something they want to do. But what I think is so beautiful about angling, or at least what Nick said, is that nobody's forced to make small talk, right? Everyone is there focused on the same thing. You're sort of side to side. But over time, by showing up to that same place over time, you are eventually bonding with the people next to you. And it's genuine, right? You have this shared passion. You're not just chatting about the weather. First, you're chatting about angling itself. And then Nick says eventually he started opening up about his mental health struggles, and other people did the same. And so that's just one example of how a social prescription can really not only help somebody with whatever symptoms they're struggling with, attention, anxiety, depression, but it also led Nick to meet lifelong friends. In other words, the health benefits sort of outlasted the prescription. And now he comes back to the river every Thursday, even though he's no longer socially prescribed to do it.
That's awesome. Kind of reminds me of when I was younger, I worked for a canoe guide. So we would go on big, long canoe trips. And he was former military and specialized in bringing active service members coming back from Afghanistan. They would have a big long canoe trip in between coming home and seeing their friends and family. And and it was kind of supposed to be a bit of a buffer in between, the society that they left and the society that they're returning to. But now I'm hearing you talk about it, I'm kind of looking at it with new eyes, and how that, lots of movement, canoe tripping is difficult. It's lots of movement and exercise. You're just in nature, completely surrounded. You're with people telling stories in a place that's kind of safe to open up around the fire. It was, so I'm kind of looking at that through a new lens, and it's pretty interesting to see. And it seemed to be very valuable for all the guys we did those trips with. Yeah, it's super interesting.
I love that. And you know what else is interesting about that, Adam, that I'm realizing now about Tackling Minds? There were so many military and ex-military there. And what a lot of them would tell me is that, it can be traumatic to come back from a life of service. You're very sensitive to sound. You've probably witnessed some terrible things. But what's so unique about the natural setting of the riverbank, the peacefulness of it all, is that you're still getting that sort of social kick. You're still focused on doing something, but without the risk that something might re-trigger you or remind you of something that's painful. So I think there's I know there's a lot of research that suggests fishing is really popular among people who've dealt with PTSD and, other people maybe who don't have that diagnosis, but that are coming from a military background.
I think there's so many correlations I see, and it's so great. I mean, on the very macro level, I'll share a personal story. We had a very busy 3-day weekend here, and so Saturday we spent time. They're showing our house for the move, so we were cleaning the house, getting it all ready to show, and then we had a party that evening, and we were wiped out. And Sunday we were all right, we are just going to do nothing. Kids can go downstairs and play in the playroom and hang out, and we'll watch movies and do that. We did that all day. And by the end of the day on Sunday, I was itching to get outside. And so we gathered the whole family, and I was all right, we're going. And so we all went out to a state park and went for a hike and had a picnic and all this stuff. And what you said exactly came true. There was this, all right, I've felt sort of I needed that refresh, and my body knew it needed it, and I needed to just go outside. And, I get that way too. I work a lot at home, and then I work a lot in, closed off buildings, windowless rooms, all that. And just to go outside and be in those elements and have sort of that reconnect with nature is like, it has to happen, or my body just goes through something else. It's so
Yeah. Well, okay, Justin, I don't even have to ask you what your social prescription is then, but like absolutely. And you're not alone. I mean, one really interesting study I love to quote is that they compared people who'd been recovering from some kind of surgery in a hospital. And half of the people were put in a windowless room, everything else constant, windowless room. And the other group was put in a room with a window that overlooked a garden. The researchers found that the people who were put in the room overlooking the garden with the window recovered faster, took less pain medication, had more pleasant interactions with the hospital staff. Similarly, analogous research has shown that for nursing home residents, when you encourage them to take care of a plant, this also reduces their, risk of early death, pain medication, negative affect, all of this. And it's whenever I talk about it with people, they say, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I crave nature the way that you craved nature after that day inside. But I just think it's so interesting in a healthcare setting. We're starting to now utilize that. It makes so much sense. The science backs it up. I've yet to see a study that says time in nature causes harm. So why not,
Growing up as a kid, we would, you get sick and whatever, and my grandmother would make us, you'd get like quarantined away in a room and all that, but she would come through and open all the drapes, open the windows, open the blinds, and you just got this like fresh air and sunshine. And even if you were sleeping, there was like this fresh air, sunshine kick, and that's probably some traditional medicine that she passed on and learned, probably from her parents. But just like you can't close yourself off, and as much as you just want to crawl under the sheets and just bury yourself, it's just you need that sunshine, you need that positive energy. So that's so cool. Yeah.
Midway USA has traditional cap and ball revolvers and accessories, along with the most modern inline muzzle-loading rifles. Cowboy action shooters and other fans of traditional black powder shooting will find a great selection of fully functioning replica Old West Army and Navy revolvers, plus all the necessary materials to help them go bang, like percussion caps, loaders, patches and wads, and round balls too. We carry a full line of inline rifles, as well as 209 primers, black powder substitutes, and bullets and sabots. For just about everything for black powder, shop midwayusa.com.
Want to plan your next fishing trip without the hassle? FishingBooker.com is the best way to find and book a fishing charter anywhere in the world. Whether you're chasing trophy fish or just looking for a family day on the water, Fishing Booker makes it simple, fast, and secure. With thousands of experienced guides, verified reviews, and 24/7 customer support, Fishing Booker takes the guesswork out of planning. Visit FishingBooker.com and book your trip today. Fishing Booker. Fishing trips made easy.
I think it's cool too, the correlation, and I was thinking about sort of like hunting and fishing, and everything you said about sort of fishing translates well over into the hunting world. And I think a lot of folks think of hunting can be a very independent activity, but I think it's much broader. Like when we go out and do hunting trips, you may have like 3 or 4 or 5 guys together. Like Adam mentioned, at the end of the day, you're all around the campfire. And I worked with the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, their Armed Forces Initiative, which specializes in like kind of getting military members back out hunting, fishing, involved with a purpose, with a cause towards like conservation work, and then putting on these sort of like skills programs so they can get reinjected in the wild. And countless times I've heard stories of that, of guys coming back or getting out of the military, kind of losing that sense of place, that sense of purpose or well-being, and being like, no, I got back out, I got into hunting, I got into fishing, and it helped me like recenter myself and like kind of get back on path. And I think, historically after World War II, all the veterans coming home, and that's when you had this giant boom in North America of resurgence back towards the outdoors, of the hunting, the fishing, camping, like all these things happened at that period. And I don't know. I'm not as into the research and stuff, but I wonder if people are looking at that period and saying, hey, there was something there that maybe we've never talked about or looked at. Like there was a reason why these guys just naturally gravitated towards the outdoors.
Yeah. Oh gosh. That's super interesting. And I would love to learn more about that period in the US. I hadn't known that. What I do know though, that's like a similar story is about what happened in Japan in the 1970s and 80s. Now, at that time, Japan, 1970s and 80s, historians remember that as being an incredible period of economic growth, right? You had all these new industries. You had all the people leaving the countryside and pouring into cities to, increase tech manufacturing. And at that time, it was called the Japanese economic miracle. The GDP was second in the world. What was also happening, though, is that those people who came from the country into the city started having all of these health problems, right? Cardiovascular events, mental health problems. There was even a word, karujitsu, to describe all of the health consequences of this. And so what did the government do in response to this? Because this was a problem, right? People who were sick didn't make for very good workers. And even though they tried to implement mandatory vacations and, enforce working hours, this didn't work. But what did work, surprisingly, was this government campaign for people to go back out into nature, to go back out into the country. Now, this was also kind of economically good for them because, the countryside lost all this economic activity. But at first it was just a campaign. Go back out into the forest, spend some time in nature. This is really good for us. And there was no science to back it up, really. It was just a feeling. But then in the 1990s, researchers really began studying this. And it turns out when you take stressed out businessmen and businesswomen and you force them to go into the forest and do something they call shinrin-yoku, which is forest bathing, which is to engage in the forest with all 5 senses, something miraculous happened. Their blood pressure decreased. Their heart rate decreased. They produced less of the stress hormone cortisol. They saw an increase in these cancer-fighting immune proteins. They reported feeling calmer and happier, less stressed, less anxious. So, again, I think there was just something about that period in history where whether it was war or whether it was business, we all thought, go, 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 go. And then we sort of said, wait a minute, we might have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Let's return to nature. Let's revive camping and forest bathing and hunting and fishing. These are really, really good for us.
Do you see any sort of, as we translate to modern times, are there any more modern examples of some of those similar campaigns? I know we're still, I would say probably still in the emergence of coming out of COVID for a lot of folks. And I wonder if there's movements coming off of that.
It's a great question. I think so. I mean, for me, that's what got me interested in this, is thinking okay, there's clearly something going on here. When we're all, in our houses, cut off from the things and people we love, our health doesn't do so well. So what if we tried the opposite? And it turns out England had been ahead of the curve in that. They were the first nation to really embrace social prescribing as part of their national policy. And I think ever since then, this has spread now to 30 countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
And I think even in places where the healthcare system isn't formally doing social prescribing, literally writing referrals to community activities, having insurance pay for it, we are sort of seeing this return to the importance of being in nature, moving our bodies, engaging in art, and doing it with other people. And I think one really popular example of this was a book that came out last year called The Anxious Generation. Have you heard of this book?
I think I've heard
with Jonathan Haidt.
No, I have not.
It's a really simple thesis, and it's basically the kids are not all right. Everyone's spending way too much time on screens, and we're seeing their mental health decline because of it. And I think the same can be said for adults as well. But what Haidt has really called for, and I think it's interesting that this part has gotten less attention, is for people to return people to go back, right? We used to have play-based childhoods. I started the episode with that. Like, I had an amazing childhood playing out in a lake every day with my brother and my friends. Now most kids and teens have a phone-based childhood. So there is a movement, I think, to revive the play-based childhood, but also the play-based adulthood. Because, like, again, find me a study that says any of this stuff is bad for us. And it turns out, I mean, I think attention is a place where we really see it. I'm guilty of this too. I have a really hard time focusing. Like, before we got on this call, I had 20 tabs open. I was trying to do 10 things at once. And now I know, thanks to this book, that if I just go outside for 20 minutes, that's all you need, 20 minutes, I will come back and feel more restored and focused. And this is not just a feeling. This comes from research in the 1980s. There were these psychologists, Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, who kind of, even I think less so than it is now, they noticed like people are having a really hard time paying attention. What could be behind this? It seems like most people are sort of have what they call directed attention fatigue, a hard time focusing, burnout, that sort of thing. But they also said, well, what works to reverse directed attention fatigue? It's one thing. And that one thing is time in nature. And they have this hypothesis dating back to sort of evolutionary science, suggesting, like I said in the beginning, that because we needed to be able to pay attention to nature in order to survive in it, in order to hunt, in order to gather, in order to live with it, we evolved in such a way that most things tax our attention. But nature uniquely restores it because it was adaptive for us to be able to do that. And that's why there's all this research today that shows when people do spend time in nature, their focus improves, their concentration improves. Some studies find that the effects of time in nature in kids is equivalent to taking Ritalin, taking ADHD medication. So I just think that, to your question, like, there is this obvious solution. It's almost too obvious. And a lot of people say like, yeah, this is great, but come on, is US healthcare really going to get it on board? And I would say, yes, it's starting to, but it is going to take some time for this to go really mainstream.
That's cool. There's another book I read a while back called Lost Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. That kind of covers that. It was an excellent book that kind of covers some of that stuff too. Really made an impact on my life.
Great. Totally. And that book, and there were a bunch of others, E.O. Wilson, Biophilia, that just talk about like this innate love of the living world that we all have and that we're all born with. And even though, culture is trying to get us to separate from that, one of the best things we can do is return to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. It's almost too obvious that you're like, why are we doing this? Like, it seems so natural. Even just the example I provided of like sort of trusting my own feelings to be like, we need to reset to go outside and do that. No, man, wow, this is great.
Explore historic waterways in 2025 with Scenic on the most inclusive cruise on Europe's rivers. Enjoy up to 5 dining experiences, spacious suites, and butler service. Be immersed in the culture with enriching free choice excursions and exclusive events. Scenic, in a class of its own. Book now and save.
I found a kid who swings a golf club like a dream. I'd like to try to qualify him for the U.S. Amateurs.
Coming to Apple TV Plus.
What's your name?
I'm not into older guys, but I'm flattered.
A new comedy series, Stick.
I don't want to go on this trip.
Your mouth's saying one thing, but those eyes are saying something else.
From the home of Ted Lasso.
This is your shot at redemption? This is your mulligan?
Owen Wilson.
This game takes and it takes. The game's finally giving me something back.
Stick.
You know Arnold Palmer? Iced tea, lemonade, mix it.
I'm missing a nap for this.
Streaming June 4th on Apple TV Plus.
Could we go a little bit through each of the tenets? I think Adam and I have got some questions to kind of dive a little deeper into each one.
Sure. Yeah. Do you want to start with movement?
Yeah. Let's start with movements.
Sure. And, and this relates to the, like, it's so obvious thing. A lot of times people will say, like, why do I need my doctor to prescribe me this? Can't I just do it? Can I, like you did, Justin, the other day? You had the willpower to just take yourself outside, go to a state park, hike with your family. And the same, I think it's definitely true with movement and exercise. Like, this is not a novel idea. Exercise is good for us. And it's why our doctors have been telling us, you need to exercise, you need to exercise. What's different with a social prescription is saying, first of all, like, not all exercise is created equal. There's a big difference between the feeling I get when I think about, like, going for 30 minutes on a treadmill in a sweaty gym versus playing volleyball with my friends for 30 minutes. So there's that. There's like the intrinsic motivation. And there's also this idea that your healthcare provider is going to help you figure out a specific place you can go at a specific time. In some cases, if you need help with transportation, for example, they'll arrange that. And they're going to follow up with you, right? So that's the difference between like a recommendation and a social prescription. And so for movement, for example, classic story, there had been this gentleman that I spoke with, Frank, who was in his 60s. He was a truck driver. He was overweight and diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And everywhere he went, every time he went to the doctors, they would say, Frank, you need to exercise more and you need to eat healthier food. But for Frank, who's driving a truck all day and all he wants to do at the weekend is just to go home and sleep and eat junk food, this was not very helpful. It actually caused him to sort of withdraw from the doctors. But then finally he meets this doctor who says, I'm going to flip the script for you. I'm going to ask you, Frank, what did you love to do when you were a kid? And that's when Frank says to his Dr. Ollie, well, I used to love riding my bike, but I haven't done that in years and I wouldn't know where to begin. So what did that doctor do? He didn't stop there. He said, okay, I'm going to prescribe you a course where people like you over 50 are learning to ride their bikes again. I'm going to prescribe you a spot in a course that meets at a time that works with your work schedule. And I'm going to prescribe you a bike as well. And a lot of this happens like by working with community organizations. But what happened with Frank when he did that? He starts this 10-week cycling course. He loves it. He makes friends. He starts a text group with them and says, let's keep doing this, guys. Let's keep cycling. Eventually, he loses 40 pounds and is able to come off his insulin for his type 2 diabetes. Successful social prescription. And, that's kind of obvious. Like, yeah, moving our bodies causes our, cardiovascular and digestive systems to be healthier and all this. The less intuitive one with movement is for depression. And there's a story I tell in the book about a woman named Amanda who really just had 5 terrible things happen to her in a row. She finds out her husband's having an affair, so she gets a divorce. Her mom dies. She loses her job. This is all in the background of the pandemic itself, so she's feeling extra isolated, and she has to move to a place where she knows nobody. So no wonder when Amanda is all at once disconnected from 5 important things, she becomes really depressed. And she does go on an antidepressant, which really helps her at first with some of her symptoms. But she got to this place where she just, in her words, describes feeling like stuck in a helmet. And so that's when she moves to this new place that happens to be along the British seaside. And I don't know if you've been to the UK, but it is like cold. Even in the summertime, it is really, really cold. But Amanda becomes really curious. She sees this group of older women that are swimming in the wild sea in the cold weather. And she ends up getting prescribed a spot in this group. It's called chill therapy, where she's learning how to swim in these cold water conditions. And she's doing it with other women. Now, in that case, Amanda's got a couple of things going for her. First of all, she's in the beautiful natural setting, which we've already talked about how good nature is for us. She's with other people who she, like Frank, becomes really good friends with, but she's also moving her body. And what the research finds is that movement has properties on par with taking antidepressants in that it increases our production of serotonin. We produce more endorphins. We have more energy. The problem, though, is that when people are depressed, they feel a lack of motivation. They feel a lack of energy. This is called the depression catch-22. So this is where a social prescription can really, really help, because it's saying, I'm not just going to wag my finger and tell you to exercise. I'm going to prescribe you a spot and something that you inherently want to do and that's fun. And yeah, you're going to be moving your body as part of it, but that's not like the whole point. So that's just one example about movement. And we've talked about nature. Should I keep going?
Yeah, I want to tie into nature with hunting and fishing and foraging is pretty apparent. But I think moving as well becomes so very critical when we talk about sort of the climbing, the bending, the crouching, the walking, running. I think about all through sort of like the hunting lifestyle of being like, oh, I'm somebody who walks out, sits in a deer stand and hunts, to someone who's like, I'm an upland bird hunter and I cover miles, to someone who's like, I'm out in Alaska or Colorado up in the mountains hunting, big game there and hiking miles and miles. And I think that like, man, that movement, and I think part of it too, and it sort of touches on what you mentioned, is like, you get involved in an activity and then don't realize you're involved in this movement process. Like it's just subliminal. You're like, oh, the end goal is for me to go, obtain food or go forage or go walk to this spot I really, really like and go fishing, or even, go swim, or, all these other things that are involved in movement, biking and things like that. And then that becomes sort of the cursory to all these underlying benefits that you're not even considering.
So well said, Justin. Exactly. Like, that's what's so beautiful about the people in this community is like, first of all, you're actually doing something very useful. You're feeding yourself and your family and your loved ones. Like, that's great. As you mentioned, even just the fact that you're not sitting, I was so surprised to see how much of our disease burden, particularly in this country, is linked to just sitting. And so by walking, running, crouching, squatting, not sitting, that is so good for us. And what else it's doing? It's also removing us from the things that tend to make us the most stressed. One really interesting study that I think speaks to this, they compared people who walked in two kinds of conditions. One is when they were walking alongside a busy highway, not nature, basically. And then they compared that to people who walked in a very nature-laden setting. They found that people who, again, walking in itself is good, but the people who walked in the nature-laden setting, similar, I think, to hunting, fishing, they were removed from their stressors, and therefore they had less activity in their subgenual prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that's associated with rumination, which is highly linked to anxiety and depression. So I think there's so much wisdom to what you're saying, Justin. Like, when people a lot of this is just being distracted from the things in our lives that stress us out. All the better that it's in nature and that you're moving, you're probably doing it with other people, and that it's for something useful.
Mm-hmm. I think another aspect of it too is that due to the seasonality of a lot of the things, when you're foraging, spruce tips come out for a week. You might have 2 weeks for rifle season on deer. And it's only in October, so it's almost like a prescription, because you can't put it off. If you put it off, you don't go at all. So it's almost like it forces you. If you want to get a deer, you have to go out at this time to do it. And it reminds me of almost a doctor's prescription, you can't ignore it, because then you don't get what you're looking for. So it's kind of like throughout the entire year, there's all these different seasons that force you to go out and get these things if you do want them.
Totally. That's exactly it. This idea of a doctor prescribing this to you makes it so much harder to ignore. Mm-hmm. And that's something else you have me thinking about. The way that I think a big hidden ingredient in what makes these social prescriptions so successful is that they bring us closer to our local communities. And in this case, to the seasons, they help us pay attention to what's around us more. And that, again, has all these unprecedented health benefits. So I just see in case you couldn't tell, I'm bought in. I see so many upsides to this. And I think what you're doing by really trying to create a community around this is social prescribing without the doctor's prescription. So I'm grateful for you both.
I think the nature side of things, like we've talked about it, has been it's a pretty obvious part of it. But one thing I think for a lot of hunters, especially those who are still hunting, is that it creates a similar system to the Japanese forest bathing, where you just have to be present in nature for hours. And it's difficult to do. Like, I just did a 13-hour sit on a turkey hunt a few weeks ago, and it was brutal. But in a lot of ways, it forced me to sit in a bush and just watch nature unfold. And all these things happened throughout the day. All these animals approached. You could notice the leaves around you. You notice the breezes pushing through. It was like something that I don't notice when I feel like I'm pretty present in the woods, but even still, you really have to be stationary for a while and just soak it in. And I think that's a difficult thing for people to do, but as hunters, we're often forced to do that.
Yeah.
And it's something it can be difficult, but it's also quite enjoyable.
And that's another key element you touched on, Adam, about sort of the art of all of this. You know, you mentioned that you found a lot of beauty in seeing these turkeys and noticing the leaves' colors. I think for some people, again, they might hear art and they think that's a nice to have. That's not actually essential for our survival the way that movement is. But actually, noticing beauty in the world is essential for our survival. Because again, just like being able to pay attention to nature and move our bodies, we evolved to be able to do this. So even, for example, I could imagine the hunting community, like talking about the most beautiful places you've been and having a language for that beauty and telling stories. And also even, Justin, like you were talking about the way, you know, your grandmother would open the windows, being able to like pass on wisdom like that, that is a form of art. And what it does for us is it helps us make sense of the world and it makes it more enjoyable to live in. So that's why, you know, art in particular is really helpful for anxiety. Some people, I mean, I'm sure you know this, but hunting and fishing and angling, it might not be for everybody. But what I actually learned is that the word art in Greek comes from the word for the imitation of nature. And so for people who, for whatever reason, can't or don't want to like actually put themselves in a wild setting, being able to sort of replicate some of the dynamics in nature through art and engage with it also has these properties of reducing our stress, making us more present, making us more joyful, which again have all these incredible health benefits.
We've hit through most of them. I think we talked about service kind of briefly. I think we mentioned it.
Yeah.
We could talk about sort of how people can connect with you. So to sort of get more, I think we just scratched the surface of this, but how can people learn more? How can they get a hold of your book and sort of reach out with questions or stories or comments or anything?
Totally. Well, all this research we talked about today, movement, nature, art, we didn't get as much into service and belonging, but I think that was at the heart of so many of our discussions. Sure. And again, so much, in the hunting community. You could check out that research at www.socialprescribing.co. That's the website of my book, The Connection Cure, The Prescriptive Power of Movement, Nature, Art, Service, and Belonging. And to connect with me, I am on the social medias, all of them, at Hotz Thoughts, Hotz Thoughts.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, no, thanks. I appreciate you so much for coming on. I just keep like kicking myself because I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense. This is great. And I like now am, I was thinking about sort of like applications of this in different environments in, my work in the outdoor community that you've already mentioned. But I think there's like so much more there that is hunters and anglers and foragers. We embrace it naturally because some of this is very intuitive to what we do. But I think talking about it, which some of our community is not great at doing, is a good reason to just spread this word further of like, hey, actually, beyond just going out and getting food and being active, like there are these other underlying things that we need to talk about and that we need to discuss and have as part of our sort of, I don't want to say sales pitch because that makes it cheap, but like, hey, this is good, this is natural, this is why, another very solid reason why we should take up this lifestyle if we're able. And I think that prescribing piece hits on the encouragement of getting other people to do it.
Yeah. Well, I'll say you've sold me. Ever since I got this invitation and was thinking like, how does this connect? There's actually so many ways this connect. One thing we didn't talk about that is personal for me is like right now I'm feeling just a little bit frustrated and hopeless about the state of our world.
Yes.
I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And so I found myself more interested in like turning local, turning inward, trying to do like, what are the things, especially like this is a part 2, but like the way that technology is going, the way that it's going, I'm scared that I might not have a job in 10 years. And so I feel that the need for us to be able to live with the land and pay attention to nature and have these essential survival skills is so important, even for like city bums like me. I have become so much more interested in this. And like you said, all the better that, hey, there's all these physical and mental health benefits. But I think it just comes down to the need, like we have to make sense of the world and we have to understand our impact on it. The service chapter gets into this. And I think that's what hunting and angling does so beautifully. You see the results of your work right in front of you and you're having fun along the way.
Yeah. I agree, and man, you're right. Part 2, like putting putting food on the table and sort of sharing it with friends and family. I think that hits that service piece as well, and I think like that sort of checks the box. But no, thanks again for coming on. I know we gotta run, but we'd love to have you back on and sort of dive deeper into some of these topics at another point for sure.
I would love it.
I'll say to everybody out there listening, please go give Julia a follow on social media. Buy the book. I just bought it. I'm going to go through it and read it with my family. I'm excited to do that. And then whatever podcast platform you're listening to, please punch that 5-star button. Leave us a review. Tell us we're doing right or, tell us we're doing wrong. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.